And greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, it's time for another movie review. And today, it's a film that can, if you're a long-time viewer and you've heard me talk about one of my favorite films growing up from the 30s, you might be a little surprised to hear I have never watched, considering it is a spiritual successor to that film, especially considering when I was young, they also made a remake of this film in the 90s. That, of course, is the 1949, I was thinking right. Classic, directed by Ernest B. Shoesdick, who was the uncredited director on King Kong and Son of Kong, and written by his wife Ruth Rose and Marion C. Cooper, with special effects by Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen. This, of course, is the original Mighty Joe Young. This is my VHS copy. It's the studio archive version that RKO did. And my copy still looks pretty good, by the way. I mean, there's a couple moments where you can tell it's getting up there with in VHS age, especially since this is a former rental copy from Blockbuster. It doesn't want to slide out, but anyway. This is one of those films that I knew about, but like I said, never watched. Like I saw some of the moments that they would show in some of those documentaries on AMC and stuff when they would talk about the history of film, but I just never got around to it for some reason or another. Which, looking at this, I'm kicking myself because this is a film, if I'd watched this along with the original King Kong when I was a kid, I would have watched the crap out of this film. I like it that much. This film, like I said, is a spiritual successor because it shares no plot with the original, but it has all the same creative team. Like I mentioned, Ernest the director, he was uncredited on the original. You got Marion C. Cooper writing the screenplay. You got Willis O'Brien doing the special effects. Although, most of the stop motion for this film is actually done by Harryhausen, about 85 to 90%, but it is based on O'Brien's designs and storyboards. So with that, with the stop motion, you got the best of the old and the best of the new. And I think that's part of the reason why it looks so good for the most part. And with all that team, you got the same idea as Kong, but it's a little different. Mighty Joe Young, he is a more straight-laced, good character. I mean, he does act more like an animal at points, but you can definitely tell they still have a little bit of that gray area that they're leaning. But whereas Kong, he's a noble beast, and kind of acts a little bit like a gorilla, but not as much as probably one would act. I think definitely the later Kong films have that a little bit more. But he probably acts a little bit more like how a gorilla his size, especially one in isolation on an island with dinosaurs, would act. Whereas Joe acts like how a slightly larger gorilla, raised around humans, would probably act, especially in deepest, darkest Africa. Now, the plot of the film is it begins in Africa with our character Joe Young when she was a Ute. She lives on a farm out there with her father. One day she meets this group of natives who are carrying a basket, and she decides to trade, and she gets a little baby gorilla. Which the thing about this is it goes back and forth between an actual gorilla, which they did shoot in Africa, and an obvious doll. And you can definitely tell which parts of the film were filmed on location, which parts were filmed on the set. Because the location ones are the gorilla, and those are the insert shots, which it's a little distracting when you can spot it, but it doesn't bother me. Her father is a little hesitant at first because it's a gorilla. It's not like a dog or a cat, it's a gorilla. It's another primate, one of our cousin species, so it's a little different. It's more akin to having a child that's going to grow to a certain intelligence equivalent with humans than having a pet. Like a step above having a parrot. But he gives in, and as we see, they keep it. Now we skip ahead a number of years, and we meet another one of our main characters, and that is Max O'Hara, played by Robert Armstrong, who is also returning from the original Kong film, because that is Carl Denham himself. You can tell here he's a decade older, and for playing this type of character, his increased age actually benefits him, but of course he also got a mustache, he's got that same cadence of voice and all that. The Max O'Hara character is essentially Carl Denham without being Carl Denham. So if you expect him to play a different type of character, it might be a little disappointed. But when I saw he was in the film, I'm like, it's going to be a Carl Denham type character. And of course, considering that Kong and Joe are two different types of characters, he's not as financially responsible as Carl, because not anybody really dies from Joe's excursion, but financially he's kind of in the same boat. He is setting up a nightclub in LA, but he's also going to Africa to get some more stuff for it. And he ends up going out there with Greg, who's played by Ben John, who was also in the Wild Bunch in the Last Picture Show. And while they're out there, they catch some lions and all that, and then they run into the title character, Joe Young. And of course, this is where we get the big old scene where Joe is being chased by horses. They're trying to lasso the gorilla, which I just love the line, "You can't lasso a gorilla!" Which is true, even a normal-sized gorilla. I would love to see someone try to lasso a silverback gorilla. You would probably need a team of people, and even then it'd probably get out of there, depending on how big the gorilla is. And when they're about to shoot it, that's when Jill, played by Terry Moore, who was in Son of Lassie, Murder, She Wrote, and she also had a cameo in the remake, shows up and she interrupts it. And they get the shooting to stop, and Max intervenes and signs Jill and Joe to a contract, and they become the centerpiece in his nightclub, the centerpiece act. And of course, the whole big thing in there, like with King Kong, he had the whole thing in lights, Kong the Eighth Wonder of the World. This one, it's Mr. Joe Young, and of course everyone who goes there who has money is like, I wonder who this Joe Young is. Max, you gonna tell us who this Joe Young is? And he decides not to tell him, because, that's his secret for now. And this is where we get to the scene that is showcased on the cover of my VHS, where we see Jill playing Beautiful Dreamer on the piano, and everyone's wondering what's going on. And slowly we see the piano rising, and then it's being held up in the air, and then it illuminates, and there is Mighty Joe Young holding the piano up. And this scene right here is where you can definitely see why they made this film. It's not only just to make money, but it is to show off how much the stop-motion special effects that were pioneered in King Kong in the early 30s have advanced in an almost 2 decades time period. Because this scene looks amazing. Like, the special effects still look good. I mean, some people will say that stop-motion is a little jinky at times because of how it moves. Here, there's only like a couple moments where I will say that, but they do not involve Joe. Joe, I think, looks amazing all throughout. They took what they did with Kong and they perfected it here. The parts that look a little are the parts where they have to do the close-up insert shots of stop motion of humans and other type of animals, which is only a couple. With Jill in this scene, there's only like a couple of moments where you can tell that it is stop motion and not her. It kind of goes a little bit into Uncanny Valley because of the movements. They don't seem as natural. And that's mainly because, whereas Joe, you don't have the movements of a real gorilla that's an adult to compare it with. With Jill, you got the movements of the real person playing the piano to compare it with in the long shots. And that's also with the lions jumping the couple times it's stop motion. You can tell. In Africa, when it's jumping to run away, I give it a pass. But when it's in the nightclub scene, it's like, it really stands out a bit. But that doesn't take away from the rest of the special effects. They are still amazing. And then, of course, we get the scene where he plays a tug-of-war with a strongman, all played by professional wrestlers of the time, which, looking at them and then finding that out, I'm like, oh yeah, I could see it. They definitely all look like they would have been 40s professional wrestlers. They got that look about them, and even their showmanship when Max is introducing each of them, yeah, that strikes me as old-timey professional wrestlers. Yeah. Of course, given that this is from the Kong creative team, you all know something's got to go wrong. Now, Joe being there strikes me as it's a novelty that's going to wear off pretty quickly. It's just like when you go to the zoo and you see the gorillas, you keep going back, it kind of loses its luster. And here that happens. They have to throw in other stuff, and you can see that it really is losing its luster with the audience and a little bit with Jill, because she doesn't like the fact that Joe has to be kept in a cage. Well, eventually, one night, these old wrench drunk guys sneak backstage. They give Joe some alcohol. He breaks out and he ruins the nightclub. There's a scene where he breaks the lions out because the design of this nightclub, it is based off of the African jungle safari aesthetic, but they also got these very thick panes of glass where they have animals behind it. We mostly see lions, and I knew this was going to be a Schrodinger's gun type of situation when they mentioned how thick the glass was. I'm like, when I heard that, I'm like, I bet Joe's going to punch that when he gets out later. And I was right, he punches it and the lions get away. Watching this part, though, I'm like, how many freaking lions do they have behind this glass pane with how many they were running? I'm like, there's enough there to stock more than a zoo. There's enough to stock a couple zoos with how many there were. And, of course, Joe is trying to punch them all. This is probably one of the few parts where the meshing of the effects doesn't work as well, because looking at it, I'm like, yeah, I think certain lions are probably running at him, but I think a lot of them would probably be hightailing it when they see what type of creature this is. But it's like a small thing overall. Now, unlike Kong, where they decide to kill him, they get Joe back into his cage, but then they are taken to court, and the judge makes a decision to shoot the gorilla. The way they say it, though, it's like, yeah, nowadays they probably wouldn't say it like that in a court order, but back in the 40s, I can see them being like, yes, my ruling is that gorilla will be shot. Which, given the type of damage it has done, is like, really? You're going to shoot the gorilla? You would think that they would order a lot of financial things and say, okay, you're going to have to take him back to Africa, or he will be shot. Not that he will be shot. Well, all three of them, Jill, Greg, and Max, they decide to bust Joe out. And I just love the way they do it. Where Max's initial strategy just boils down to, I'm coming, Elizabeth! When I saw that, I'm like, oh my god, that is good. Robert really sells having heart issues well. And of course, they get him out, and the whole convoluted thing with switching trucks, the cops being after him. And it looks like it's going to be a straight up chase to try to get him to the boat. But then they happen to pass an orphanage that is on fire. And here we get a good climax. Now, even though this calls itself the archival version, this scene does not have the orange tint like the original release in theaters did. Which, watching it, I can see why you would have the orange tint there. It kind of adds a little bit to the novelty of it. And plus, since that whole scene involves a fire, it does give the illusion that there is a fire tint. Now, that whole scene is still amazing because you see Kong, excuse me, I'm so used to saying Kong, you see Joe, excuse me, climbing up the tree, taking Jill and Greg up there to get everybody out. The one baby's still up there, him climbing, getting there, and then the whole thing with the tree falling. And I just love that they point out, like, no one's going to shoot this gorilla now. It's like, yeah, Joe just helped save some orphans from a burning building. No one in their right mind, the court of public opinion, is going to let the law get away with shooting this gorilla, even with what he did at the nightclub. And, of course, the last scene, we see Greg, Jill, and Joe back in Africa, and they send Max a home video. And there's one little thing I love about this, is that earlier in the film, when they give Joe a banana, he eats it peel and all. But in this little video thing, he actually peels it and then just eats the banana. Nice little shot there with character development. And the thing is, there is a budding romance between Greg and Jill. We see them kiss earlier. And of course, them going back to Africa, obviously, they're together and Joe's there with them. Now, it's from how I've described it, obviously it's not the deepest plot, but you could say the same thing about the original Kong. It doesn't have the deepest plot. It's there, pretty good plot for what type of film it is, and it's there to help showcase the special effects. Same thing here. Takes the concept and does perfect it with a modern lens at that time. Like I mentioned, the special effects by O'Brien and Harryhausen are excellent, combined with the cinematography by Joy Ray Hunt and the score by Roy Webb, who did additional music on Return to the Fly, Notorious, and Cat People. And then, of course, Ernest's direction. It's there. And, of course, with the story, you got Marion C. Cooper. Now, apparently the one part that O'Brien and Cooper clashed on this film was the rampage in the nightclub scene, because Cooper wanted it the way that it was shown, whereas O'Brien wanted it to be a little bit more accidental, not Joe's fault or go in a different direction. But of course, you can see Cooper got his way. That's how you could sum up this in the other Kong films. Cooper gets his way. Now, this is an interesting story from the second unit director, David Sharp. We were shooting some action stuff, which featured lions, tigers, elephants, and apes in cages around the table area. We had trained lions to run from one side of the set to the other. One of them broke loose, jumped onto the top of his cage, and grabbed the trainer by the throat. I was in the camera cage. I pushed the iron door open, raced across the set, and punched the lion in the face. I guess I shocked him so badly, he let go, turned tail, and ran into his cage. Yeah, I don't think a lion would expect getting full punched in the face. Like, bad kitty! I guess that was a cowardly lion that was on set that day. Didn't really feel like he was king of the forest there. And this is another interesting thing about that scene. They got stock audio of Fay Wray from the original Kong that was used. Which I guess makes sense if you got the audio and you need it there. I kind of realized it sounded familiar at one point. I just don't remember what part of the scene it's in. Let's see if I got the money. Oh, I didn't write that down. I'm going to look at the budget thing. Now, another sad thing is that, technically speaking, this movie did not make a lot of money during its initial run. And part of that was that this film, sadly, had the misfortune of being a victim of studio accounting. Now, I've mentioned studio accounting and all that multiple times on this channel. When I go to the whole thing about Hollywood accounting, you gotta make double your budget to break even, which sounds weird, unless the initial budget does not include marketing costs. But here, for this film, while they were making it, especially since post-production was going to take a while, a lot of other cost overruns from other films that the studio was making were tacked onto this one. Which I think is a shame and something that they should not do. And the reason I bring it up is that even though it's not a movie, apparently WCW was a victim of the same thing by Time Warner. So it's like, yeah, that sucks. I'm happy that this film did get its audience in later years, though, and made more money. Obviously more than enough, and its legacy was strong enough to warrant a remake in the 90s, which I have never seen either, even though I have it over there somewhere. But it's one of those ones that sadly didn't make as much at the time, like Wizard of Oz, but has grown as the years gone on. It's definitely a film that, even though I got the VHS here, I do plan on getting the Blu-ray or DVD of it down the road and putting it on my shelf right next to the original King Kong. Nice little place to put it. And if I ever do have children, I do plan on showing them the original Kong and this back to back. Because, like I said, I kicked myself that I never saw this film when I was a kid. So if I ever do have any of my own, I'm going to rectify that partially by showing this to them. And that's really all I have to say about it. It's not really much else notes. It is a excellent film. Special effects, take what Kong did and up it. The acting from those principal three, what you would expect for this type of film, direction, and all, score, and all that. It is a fun time. If you are a fan of giant monster movies, especially the original Kong, and you have never seen this one, it does come with my highest recommendation. If you've only seen the remake and have never seen the original, been a little curious, definitely go and watch it. Or if you've just never seen the older monster films, but you've seen some of the newer ones, I definitely say the three places you should start with: original Kong, this, original Godzilla. Can't go wrong with that trio of film. And that's really all to say about this. Till next time, everybody.